All right.
Okay, so can we begin then?
You can begin.
Good. So I'm delighted to see so many of you back. It's good to know that the topic we have chosen, the Israeli art in connection to Zionism, seems to appeal to many. So I'm happy about that. Just for, I know some are here today that were not on the first one. And also just to remind ourselves in general terms, when we say Israeli art, and I'm doing it the early 20th century, was a very interesting time in art world in general, and in Israel in particular. So in the art world, we said that it was the period of post-impressionism, and the artists were looking for different ways to express themselves. The term post-impressionism is very general. It's broad. It includes painters, naive painters like Henri Rousseau or Matisse, and it includes Picasso in Cubism. So a lot of artwork that followed and turned a different page in the artwork post-impressionism. In our national life, that was the time of the beginning of political Zionism with Herzl and the Congress and so on. And there was, I think I mentioned it last time, they wanted, in a way, the motto, I would say, was to those who live in Israel now, remove the garments of the diaspora and wear the garments of homeland, which referred to outward clothing, but symbolically to much more than that. And the Israeli artists of the period were trying to find a way to express this idea, and also do it not in writing, of course, but with the pen, with the paintbrush. So I am going to start now. We looked at Nahum Gutman, and I like to remind you that Nahum Gutman came to Israel. He was 6 years old. So he was really product of the Israel culture. Actually, I should be specific there. Uh, Israel culture under the Ottoman rule in Palestine. And today we were going to look at Rouven Ruben, who came to Israel later when he was already 19. So you will see in his paintings a blend of influences and original work that we did not see in Nahum Gutman, because he was starting from scratch completely, but Ruben already had some kind of worldview in art. Now I am going to share my screen, and I am trying to do a different format, hope it works, because I'd like to give you a better view of the art pieces. So basically, you will, let me do art show from current slide, and I want to do it so you'll see the entire art piece. Okay, you see now Nahum Gutman clearly, nice and large. This is the painter, and he is captured here with one of his well-known paintings, and it's actually a painting of as we will see in the series, he painted a lot of, as Nahum Gutman did, the Arab inhabitants of the land. So we'll get to it in a minute. So this is Nahum Gutman, and a little bit about him. You see, he was born in Romania, and he was born in Romania.
It says, Judith, it says Rouven Ruben.
Yes, that's his name, Rouven Ruben.
Oh, Nahum Gutman, that's he changed
No,
his name?
No. The one we saw last time was Nahum Gutman.
Yeah, but I'm saying this is, okay.
Yeah, this is all Rouven Ruben.
Okay.
And he was born in Romania to a Hasidic family. He was number 8 of 13 children. And around 1912, he left for Ottoman ruled Palestine, and he studied in the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design in Jerusalem. Now, at the time, the Bezalel school was it. At one time, maybe we should look at the work of the Bezalel school. But he found himself at odds with the artistic views of this academy and his teachers, and he left for Paris to pursue his studies. But with the outbreak of World War I, he returned to Romania, where he spent some time. The World War I was a very tumultuous time for the Jewish people in Palestine, because the Ottomans were on the, as we say, the wrong side of this war, and they ruled there, so they accused the population of spying, and that's a whole different story. So he went to Romania. It's not what I wanted. Oh, I'm going back. That's good, man. Okay. So, no, I skipped too far ahead. He also, in 1921, he came to the United States with other artists, and he became acquainted with Alfred Stieglitz, you know, Georgia O'Keeffe. He's the very famous photographer, and Stieglitz was instrumental in organizing for the two painters, but specifically for Ruben, exhibitions in New York. So he became known beyond Palestine. And on his way back in one of those trips, he met his future wife, Esther, and I'm pointing it out because she was a young lady from the city of New York who was born in the Bronx, and she won a prize in a writing competition in Young Judea, which as Naamat, we are familiar with Young Judea. And the prize was a trip to Palestine. So they met on that ship. It was quite a love story. I'm jumping ahead. Here we have a picture of him and his wife, Esther, when Rouven Ruben took the position of Israel's ambassador in Romania, but this is much later. I tried to find some pictures of his wife. I read about her and I was told she was very pretty and very smart. So this is an older picture of her. She was fortunate to live almost to 100 years. 99, almost 100. She passed away in 2009. And she was 2009, yes. And she was an instrumental in turning their home in Jaffa, which we'll see in a minute, into a cultural center for the Hebraic society. I'm saying Hebrew, not Jewish, because they were all very secular. So just thought that you'd be interested in seeing her. And his style, and painters like him, like-minded, did not turn to Jewish folk art like, let's say, Chagall did, but more to the works of the French naive, childlike painter, as I mentioned, Henri Rousseau. Now, they wanted to start something from the beginning, something that would be unique, not encumbered by artistic traditions. So I think Gutmann did it truly that way, but Ruben blends different things, as I point out, to create this, his unique style. And do remember the childlike, naive. When we say naive art, simply means childlike, or a person who did not get any training, like Grandma Moses. But when painters who have good training use it, we still use naive, but of course they're trying to free themselves from the accepted standards in the art world. So I'm just giving you here an example of a painting by Henri Rousseau. It is the outskirts of Paris. And you see it has like this hazy look to it. We'll see it later in Ruben's painting. And this is considered one of the naive art. Here is a painting also of Rousseau, which we have at the Cleveland Museum of Art. And do you see the full painting? Because I see myself at, yes or no? You don't see the bottom. Marcy, can you just spotlight me and I'll put myself up somewhere in the corner?
Hang on a second. You are spotlighted.
Okay. Now I don't see myself at all.
Okay, you're on the top, you're on the right.
Okay, I don't see myself, but whatever. So
Okay,
this
we see you.
Okay. And if not, you hear me. So that's it. This is a painting of Henri Rousseau that we have at the Cleveland Museum of Art. And you see, it's not realistic at all. Look how the bananas grow. It's called buffalo and tiger fighting. This person, he never left Paris, never saw a jungle. So it's really like a child would imagine this. Now, Rouven Ruben was among the formulators of the naive, primitivistic trend in Eretz Israel. And this was, as I said, mentioned in line with the spirit of Zionist revival that viewed the East, the Orient, as primal, innocent world. And we'll refer to it as we see his depictions. It's kind of an important point, so that's why I repeated it. Now, as I mentioned, I did not expect to see Christian art in an Israeli artist presentation, I think. But interestingly, since Rouven Ruben came to Palestine when he was already 19 years old, he was exposed to a lot of Greek Orthodox Byzantine art, and you will see that he adopted some of this element in his painting. Particularly, you should pay attention to elongated shape of the face. And he not only, and he used symbolism from iconic icons of Christianity, which were not so, were not part of Jewish art, but they served the purpose, as we will see. So he also used this kind of format, which is, I'm sure many of you know, is called the triptych, because we have 3 panels. And again, you see the elongated face of the saints represented. So one of his iconic works, which is in the Art Museum in Yerushalayim, takes this triptych shape. Okay, so I mentioned taking off the garments of diaspora. This is a self-portrait of Rouven Ruben, who painted himself just before he made Aliyah and moved to Palestine. And if you look at this painting, the colors are yellow, but not a bright yellow of the sun. It has this greenish hue. His face is wrinkled, sickly looking. His clothing is wrinkled. To me, and you can read whatever you see in him, each, it's art is in the eye of the beholder. But to me, he looks like someone who suffers and unhappy. And notice particularly his hands. The gesture that his hands are a gesture of supplication. He's like asking. So not knowing more, I would say, he looks like a person with his hands begging, asking, where is the solution to this situation that I am in? But this is from the iconography of Christianity. Often you will see Jesus with his hands depicted the same way. Now it worked for him and it served the purpose. So this was a year or so before he made Aliyah. So keep this image in mind and look at the next one. There he is a year later. Totally different person. He painted, and I'm sure he was not so tan like you see him here, but he wanted to blend, show himself trying to blend with the colors of his new home. So people in the Orient tend to be darker, so he painted it this way. He holds in his hand brushes, And this is him bringing his professional tools to the new land. He was often depicted as the, how did they call him? A palette poet of Israel, unlike with words, but with his palette, with his brush. And in the other hand, he holds a flower. Now, the flower could be just a symbol of renewal. The flower is white, it's pure. It could be the beginning of new life, which it definitely is. But it also is part from the iconography, of Christian art. You will often see this flower, a white lily, associated with the Virgin Mary. So for him, it was like, it's a virgin land, we're starting anew. Now, the background is flat land. You don't have a deep perspective and just, it's flat kind of. And this was very typical of paintings that the Post-Impressionist Cézanne used. And then on the right, you see tents, which many of the new immigrants lived in tents. On the other hand, you see the beginning of more permanent settling. Now, he is kind of framed, you see, like one mountain is like, see the outline by his shoulder and above his head, and it is as if he is immersing himself into the new land. Now, he was known for painting self-portraits quite often. So here I just brought you another photo of him in his studio, and there you see on the wall another depiction of him, a self-portrait on the background of Galilee hills. And as you see the picture, he's not that tan, but he likes to paint himself that way. Here is again, he is self-portrait, and here on the right, he is sitting outside, and could be, it looks like in nature, but it's not quite sure where. But you see again, he with his brush, and then you see greenery, things starting to grow. And I'll talk about it in a minute later. Hope I don't forget.
Judith, I have a question.
Yes.
Why do artists choose to do so many self-portraits rather than what they see or what they experience?
Okay, it depends who, but almost all have self-portraits. I cannot answer really, didn't give you really a good answer. I think maybe for posterity. I know Van Gogh painted his life in different stages, whatever, not sure. But his work tries to see him, how he is immersing himself in the new home that he picked for himself. So here, I'm sorry, it's not a good enough answer, but I don't think I know another one. Other one that I was saving for later could be when he was asked what are the subjects of his paintings. In broad strokes, he said, I paint what I love. I love my family, I love my people, and I love my country. And perhaps, if I may, he also loved what he was doing. So here he is in Yafo, because they lived in Jaffa. And you see, again, he has a brush or something in his hand. In the background, you see the Mediterranean Sea and a ship. And we talked last time a lot, the importance of the Jaffa port, that was the main gate to Palestine, and the ships that brought new Olim immigrants to the land, and also brought supplies, and later on was used for export as the main port. So it was a very important theme in Gutmann's painting, and you have something of it in Rouven Ruben also. Now you can tell it's the Mediterranean because you see camels right there. I'm not sure what the blue jar represents, maybe spices, but you do have a tree. He always is sure to put something that shows growth, because growth in the land was the subject. That's what we wanted. There was a very famous song of the era, which those of you Hebrew speakers and know the old songs, it was Anu, or maybe you know the song Anu Banu Arza, Anu Banu Arza, which was we came to the land to build it and to be rebuilt as a nation. Here is again, and here is much, much darker. So now you see in the blue sky, you see, first of all, a dark cloud. And in the sky, you see the Zeppelin. You all remember the Zeppelin, that was a big invention that for air travel at the time. I know there are paintings and photos of the Zeppelin over London. And in 1931, the Zeppelin hovered over Tel Aviv, and it was a big excitement. I know many authors who wrote their memories of that period also mentioned the day they all viewed the Zeppelin. Now it's 1931, so some winds are starting to blow from Europe that declare or bring with them negative events. And we know what happened shortly thereafter. Then you see the people on the top, and this is very naive, primitive style. You see people on the left, on the roof of the building, waving to the Zeppelin. You see a flag, I'm not sure what, although there should be a flag. I wonder if they did actually. No, they did. It's an Israeli flag, because the Israeli flag, as we know it now, was already conceived in the first World Zionist Congress in Basel. Again, there is a ship, and now behind him is again greenery for growth. I noticed that on the table, he put a Gregor, a Rashan, which maybe represents ties to the past, and this bowl with fish in it. Well, he should have a very fertile imagination. Although I once kept a goldfish in a jar like that, but that's not the usual way of keeping a fish. But again, fish represent reproduction, reproducing. Fish multiply a lot. So this is also a symbol of fertility. And we needed more and more people in the land. The background is again very flat. Moving on. Here he is, same background, but now he painted himself with his beloved wife, Esther. And notice how her eyes are blue. I didn't bring more paintings of her. As I said, she was very pretty, very big blue eyes. Now here they are seated on a balcony in their home in Jaffa. And again, you see a plane hovering. So planes like that, harbor, war, so on, not necessarily leisure travel. And you see ships, and you see Yerushalayim, you see the Mediterranean again. He always makes sure to paint himself with the tools of his profession, which are the brushes. Now, the balcony played a very important role, and still does, in the Middle East, especially Mediterranean, before air conditioning and what have you. So this was just for convenient. People spend a lot of time on their balconies toward the evening, for especially on the seashore, for cool breeze coming from the sea. But in Yafo, as I'm sure in other countries, it was also an interesting domain. It is a domain between a public domain and the private domain, which is his home. So to his home, as I mentioned before, the who is who of Jaffa intelligentsia would be invited, author, poets, painters. He wanted to be part of the milieu outside the public domain, but in a bit he keeps himself as an observer. So he's somewhere in between those two, the public and private domain. As Gutmann did, he too painted a lot of scenes of Yafo. And again, this is a naive, buildings. You could think, well, children can paint this triangle roof and the shape of the house. But for them, it was restarting like children. And then we'll grow into who we will be. And again, ships and the sky is ominous. You see those gray clouds. He makes sure to put a little bit of green color there again. And you have plantation in front. And of course, this time you find the tzabah, the cactus, which became a symbol for the new Israeli that is prickly on the outside, but sweet inside, all those cliches. And again, painting of Jaffa Harbor, same kind of style of painting. This sky is much, much darker. You'll see under this shade here, a vehicle, which also Gutmann painted when he painted Edmund, the Baron Rothschild coming to Palestine. This was the mode of transportation. This one probably was pulled by a person or was attached to a donkey or a horse. So it's like a carriage of that type, very typical to this time. And here is one of his iconic paintings. I hope you can see the brushstroke in this presentation. This is his rendering of early Tel Aviv. Now, the previous pictures were in Jaffa. Jaffa was predominantly an Arab city with Jews living there until in 1909, a group of Olim, like Arlozorov and others, bought some dunes, nothing, there was nothing there, sand. And they decided this will be a totally, from the beginning, Jewish city. Unlike Yerushalayim, which had always Jewish presence, but it had many, many other, other presence, as it is important in all the three religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and it had long, long tradition. So Tel Aviv is going to be not the Jewish city. They made the distinction. They called it the first Hebrew city. And in Yerushalayim, at the time of the turn of the century, you still heard a lot of Yiddish spoken, and of course many other languages, Arabic, Hungarian, what have you. And Eliezer ben Yehuda, who was the reviver of the Hebrew language, of course not him alone, he was actually excommunicated at one point because the feeling was he desecrated the holy language. In Tel Aviv, in contrast, the language that people spoke and were kind of almost a law, you have to speak Hebrew, not Yiddish, not other languages. Of course, it didn't quite work that way. Now, what you see here, he painted this painting in 1923. After these homes were already purchased by the settlers, by the way, it was an interesting way how they divided the land. They took shares, who will get, they all bought this land and called it Achuzat Bayit, not Tel Aviv yet. And well, they paid equally, but there as if any other property that are more desirable property than others. So they wrote the lot numbers on seashells, and people picked out the seashell, and what number you got, that was where you lived. Now, Tel Aviv, that he painted is actually a poor neighborhood even then, because this was where many of the refugees from Jaffa escaped, Jewish refugees, to Tel Aviv, because that was the time in 1921 where what we call the Praot or Meoraot, the riots in Jaffa that many Jews were killed. And they were also driven out and went to other parts of Palestine. So many came to this new city, Tel Aviv, but they were just starting their buildings. And here, this looks very much like a cubist kind of painting. Again, not a lot of depth in it. You see a lot of yellow, which is now brighter yellow because it's under the bright sun of Palestine, Israel. And the contours are like the dunes, and it seems like the city sprung out from the foam of the sea. And by the way, just a reminder that the name Tel Aviv is actually a Hebrew version of the name that Herzl called the land in his book Alt Neuland. That was Herzl's book about the future Jewish state. And Alt meaning old, new land in German. And here Tel is like the Tel in archaeology, which is the ruins. So that's the old, and Aviv is spring, so that's the new. I think I spoke more than I wanted about this. Okay, we're coming now to Rouven Ruben's iconic work that is in Museum Israel. I included him painting his son. You see the boy on the left and in the painting, and he's as the background is his iconic painting that is called First Fruit. And I brought it so you should see the dimensions. This was really more a mural, I would say, than a painting. So now let's take a look at it. Here is the triptych that I was talking about before from Christian world. So we will look first at the two sides, although my eye gravitates immediately to the center, but we're going to look first at the two side panels, the smaller panels. So let's look to the left panel. And you see, this is here to represent the indigenous people of this land, which it seems kind of difficult to understand, but they saw the Arabs as they were there as people who lived there for years, and they were not very productive people. You see the mountains behind them are barren. In the front, one tree is growing, and this is a shepherd, and they were viewed as innocent. The Orient was viewed as innocent. We know otherwise. But when they were looking for symbols, that was the symbol that they used. As innocent, but not forward-looking. On the left, you see again an Arab, it's a contour of a person in repose, and you see a camel, and again, very barren. And the person almost, his contour is almost one with the land. So they don't impact the land. They live on it, but it is, as it was for generations. Now look at the center. This too is kind of sort of divided to two planes. On the left, you see Yemenite Jews. And just as the Arab represented the Orient, so the Yemenite Jews, the thinking was they are the closest to what Jewish people looked when they lived in the land of Israel in biblical times. So you see a traditional person with a hat and a beard, and he has side locks like peot. And next to him is his wife. She's dressed in typical head covering of women in Yemen and in the Middle East and that area. She carries her child on her shoulder, and in her hand she has a pomegranate. Now the child is the fruit of the womb, so that represents fertility and children, and the bringing forth more children is represented by the pomegranate. As we mentioned last time, it has 613 seeds. I don't know if anybody ever tried to count it, but and that corresponds to the 613 commandments we have. But it also represents fertility, a lot, many, having many, many children. The other panel, more to the right, in the center panel, is actually almost dominated, overpowered by the figure of this man who has volume as opposed to the Yemenite. He is strong, he is big, you see muscles, and he carries on his shoulder, not like sometimes Hercules was depicted carrying the world on his shoulder, but he's carrying a watermelon. And watermelons are found in Israel, and it's very popular fruit that we eat in Israel. And this represents, well, we are here in this world, this environment, and yes, it's barren still around, but we are working this land. We are going to make it like it's the biblical promise, the land of milk and honey and wheat and barley and so on. Now, he doesn't take wheat and barley and so on. He takes a watermelon that was endemic also to the area, and bananas, which I don't know if they were, I don't think they're the biblical time, but this is now more contemporary. Now, the woman seated next to him, bearing her chest, actually, her breasts, and she holds in her hand orange, and in the basket at her feet, oranges. So this is the new woman of the land who maybe has to sacrifice her femininity, like not to be the one who brings forth children, but helps build the land. Are there any questions up to here? Comments?
I don't see any in the chat.
Okay, so in that case, I'm gonna move on. This piece is in the Art Museum, in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Now, I mentioned that he depicted a lot the native people, and he usually did with them doing something. So you see, this is a different style of painting of his. And he experimented a lot, just like Gutman did, with different styles. So here you see, I guess, a fishmonger. He's offering his fish for sale. Same on the other side, the woman with the family. He painted them again, different. This is gouache. You see, I think this way you could see the screen better and the brush stroke. This is how, again, the sea is there, but here are white sails. It's peaceful, it's calm, the sky is blue. Again, the same, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I wanted to show you his different depictions. Here is on the left. These were actually linoleum cuts. It's not a painting. And this is of a camel being frightened to the person trying to take control of the camel. Here is different style of his painting of the people. Did you notice that the faces are always elongated like it was in the Byzantine paintings? Moving right
And the fingers are always
long.
very long.
Yes, Marcy, absolutely. This is from the Byzantine art that influenced him. Thank you for that comment. I forgot to mention, yes, fingers are always long. Now we're moving to a different stage. So I kind of looked at it. He came to the land. He tried to blend in, be part of it, painted himself with dark colors. He painted the people who were there. He's trying to start something new. But he also is tied to his roots of the past and to his Jewish roots. I'm separating, and really I don't know if such a good distinction, but not the Hebrew side, but the Jewish side, the universal Jewish side. And here is also, this is an iconic painting of his. If you look at any gallery or museum that depicts his artwork, you'll see this painting. And this is called The Dancers of Miron. Miron is the birth, it's in the Galilee, not far from Tzfat, which those areas were the centers of the beginning of Jewish mysticism. In the village, I guess, of Miron, you will find the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who it is said, tradition says, he was the author of the Zohar, the fundamental book of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. Later people say perhaps it's not exactly like that, but we accept it. Now look, if you count, you see again the elongated faces, right? The people are huddled together around, I would suppose, a rabbi, because he's holding the Torah scroll. They're very tight together. And if you count how many faces you see, including the rabbi, there are 9. So if you think, why 9? Well, you see on the right a figure that seems to be coming toward, you see the path leads to these people in the center. And this would be the 10th person to make the minyan, because you know that you need a minyan for praying in a community. But it is not joined yet the people here, but it also could be a depiction of the Mashiach, the Messiah to come. He's almost there. He's getting close to this group of people. Now, again, you see they are kind of painted in the contour of the land. The land is still flat, but you see a lot of small hills. You see on the left, I don't know if it's so clear, but it is a goat, and her udders are full. So this is for the land of milk and honey. And on the right, you see women. And in the center, perhaps you could see is a woman. They are all with the covering their heads like in biblical times, protection from the sun. And she's holding a baby in her hand. But you see at least three spots of green by that person on the right, by the women here, and by the goat. And this leaves, I don't know if that was his intention, but it reminds me of the leaves of the olive tree. So I'm going to talk about the olive a little later on. This was painted, when was it painted? 1926, but in 1976, it was on an Israeli stamp, and it was worth 1.30 shekel. So it was really well known, and I think here you see maybe the colors even better than you see the women better, I think, and the goat. Anyway, moving on. I said that he turned more also to his Jewish roots. And this painting, I think we could tell by the plate in the center, in the rabbi's hand, is a Seder plate. You see the egg, the greenery, something looks like the charoset. I do not necessarily see a Haggadah or there are 4 cups of wine. No, I see 3, but I see salt and jars for water to put the salt in. I see matzah. Now, on the right, you see him, the painter, Rouven Ruben. Behind him is his wife, and in his lap is his son. Now he called it the first Seder. When I think first Seder, I think the biblical Seder in Mitzrayim that was celebrated just before the Exodus. But this is the first Seder in the rebirth of the Jewish people in their own land. So the people who Rouven Ruben invited to the Seder are the mix of Jews who were there, who were living there. You see again, I think very similar Yemenite couple that we had in the first fruit. To me, they look identical, the same head, the payas, the boy on her shoulder. But you see European-looking people. You see traditional on the left, the traditional person. You see a person in behind with probably comes from other Arab lands with this head cover that he has around his head. You see the rabbi, and you see someone next to the rabbi with what we call kova gerev. You see that hat on his head? This was associated with soldiers at the period. I actually remember during the Sinai campaign when I lived in Israel, the soldiers in the desert still wore that kind of knit hat. So we were all asked, I was then in high school, we were all asked to knit a kova gerev to send to the soldiers to keep their hats warm in the very cold night. Now notice that Rouven Ruben included himself. He is not just an observer. He is part of what is happening in this new land. And in the background, you see, of course, Yerushalayim with the walls. And what do we always say? L'shana haba Yerushalayim. You kind of, next year in Jerusalem, you cannot have a Seder without Yerushalayim. Moving on. Here is another rabbi. I have much more, so I'm going to move faster. Here is klezmers that he depicted. And this is him going back to his roots, because without roots, you are what they say, Luftmensch. You are hovering. Although you live on the land, you still need your traditions. Now, once when he was speaking of his art in an art exhibition, Rouven Ruben said, I am not at all interested in copying nature. I wish only to express the idea of a supreme being. I am a seeker of a God who will end the suffering of humanity. I see him in color, line, and movement. So I brought this quotation here because we're going to look at very different type of art that looks very mystical, spiritual. So here we go. This is different style of his. The brush strokes are very light, barely touching the canvas. On the right is again his wife. That must have been some love story, I think. And on the right, I'm not quite sure who is trying to depict, but I just love that painting. Perhaps a mother holding up her child toward the dove, the Yonah. And of course, we know the Yonah who brought in her beak the branch of an olive tree. And there is an olive tree there, a branch represents peace. So maybe it's a universal mother's looking for a peaceful world for their children. He depicted a lot of biblical figures in this style. Now, I don't know if when you saw this red, had we been a smaller group, I would say, well, what do you think this is? Unless somebody wants to, is anybody putting in chat what they think?
No.
No.
No,
Well,
just
okay, so this is Rouven Ruben's depiction of the burning bush. And you see in the flames, the gold flames above, he put certain letters that kind of write the letters that you're not supposed to write. If there is a Yud and a Hey, because it's the name of God. And he put an angel there, and the angel in the biblical story tells Moshe to take off his shoes because he's on a holy ground. So you see the sandals depicted there. And Moshe is falling down on his face when he hears God's voice speaking to him. Could you see that angel there and so on? You see that it's very different type of painting, very spiritual, mystical. Here, he depicted, as I said, biblical heroes, and these two men who are standing so close to each other are David and Jonathan. King David and Jonathan, the son of Saul, who was the first king of Israel, and then we know later David takes his place by divine decree, but Jonathan and David were very, had a wonderful friendship that the Bible describes as they were friends in life and even in death. They were not separated. Although then Jonathan at the end, Jonathan, ends up dying on the Mount of Gilboa together with his father. They got to know each other when David used to play in the court of King Saul. He played the harp to soothe the dark moods of the king. And we have stories where Saul actually wanted, when he was in deep depression, I think modern psychologists would say, he needed music to soothe him. But at the same time, he saw already then a competitor, somebody who may inherit him and not his son. Now later, and not his son. Later, David, who is then the book of Psalms, Sefer Tehillim, is attributed to King David. He is known as Ne'im Zmirot Yisrael. He is the one who sings the pleasant songs of Israel. And there is the idea of the harp of David. So he depicted him here. In the background must be Yerushalayim. Here is another depiction of David as in the soul of the nation, and he's playing his harp. And this became really a symbol of David and the Jewish soul.
Someone mentioned that this style reminds them of Chagall.
Yes, exactly. And in particular, because he also here goes back, thank you, he goes back to the themes or subjects, traditional Jewish symbols, which Chagall did too. So yes, and it is similar. In this one, again, you see David, King David, you see the dove of peace, you see olive trees, and Mount Olives is around Yerushalayim, and in the background there is a bright sun, and on top of it, those who read Hebrew, it says, Sha'alu Shlom Yerushalayim. Seek the peace of Jerusalem. So this is what we are hoping for. Now, the olive trees, yes, they are at Mount Olives, but there is symbolism in the olive itself. Interestingly, the olive is very hard to destroy. Olives can live, I think, thousands of years. I have to check how much exactly. If there are fires, the olives immediately are one of the first to grow again. Around the tree usually are little growth of the olive that they will become then themselves new trees. And olives played important role in our tradition, in rituals. you know, in the temple. We use olive oil for Hanukkah. The kings were anointed with oil. And when David wants to say, being thankful in the book of Psalms to God for all the good that he bestowed upon him, he says, Mashachta b'shemen roshi kosi revaya. You have anointed my head with oil.
Someone asked, sorry to interrupt, someone asked if these are watercolors or acrylic or oil.
These are mostly watercolors. We'll see later on he uses stronger and acrylic, and we'll get to it in a minute. I'm almost right there. Thank you for the question. This image here, I don't know if you can see in the center, there are two horses, outline of horse and a chariot. And this is his way of depicting the prophet Elijah ascending to heaven. Because in our biblical story, we don't read that Elijah died. He ascended to heaven in a chariot of fire. So that's what you see here. Here are the strong colors, you know, that we're talking, same idea. Still Elijah the prophet ascending to heaven. And that those strong colors, he also, they were included in stained glass in Beit Hanassi, the president's home in Jerusalem. And what you see here happens to be a showcase of work of people handicapped with disabilities, and they were selling their artwork to support other organizations. And you see again in one of them, you see King David and the harp. You see Elijah ascending to heaven. So, but this is stained glass that he did. Okay, now we are going to look at landscape. And this is kind of a bizarre painting, but this is of another painting of our friend Henri Rousseau, which is the primitive, naive painting, but all these look like in a magical, mystical land. It's like all in a mist. And the next paintings of Rouven Ruben will have this haze. I would say, what would it be? Arafel, you know, over it. Here it is. So here he depicts in this painting, he loved to paint the Galilee. And in this painting, you see the hills of the Galilee. You see a lot of, what is that called? Trees, cider trees. But you see in the forefront the olive tree again. And you can see, it's very, you don't see much action. You don't see people working. You do see a shepherd with sheep that kind of peacefully probably graze, but don't disturb the landscape. I watched a video that actually was a part of the Spielberg's legacy, an interview with Rouven Ruben, and you see him sitting there and painting, but remember, not nature as it is. He is seeking God in the creation, in color, in movement, and shape. The movement, I think, in this painting are the hills or the path, and the colors are very mystical ones. I'll show you details of this.
We have a couple of comments. One person said the trees are cypress trees.
Yes.
And someone else said the olive trees are so delicate, they almost look as if his brush stroke was like that of a pointillism.
It could be. It's there because it said that it's very close to pointillism. But here, when I read about this style of his, they said the brush stroke was so light, it barely touched the canvas. And it's a very good observation. That's what it is. Let me show parts of it. Again, to see how big it is, I showed you him and his wife next to this, I would say mural or painting. Here is this one again. You see the details here. Maybe you see how it's almost like pointillism. He touches, barely touches. What looked before on the top, like almost even background, it really has a lot in it, you know, movement.
Someone asked if you know the years that these were painted, if you can mention
In,
that.
1926, around then.
And another comment was that some of the nature paintings resemble Henri Rousseau.
Yes, yes, that's what I said, exactly. Andrea, here you see, again, look at the olive tree, how delicately he puts it. But people said, I read some legends saying that the olive tree is so hard to destroy that in a way, even after fires, it grows back quickly. In a way, it symbolizes also the Jewish nation, Am Israel. No matter what, we are still here, we revive. And look on the right, how delicate that is. I mean, it has to be a real master to paint something like this. That's why I thought you should see segments of it up close. Here is again the same. Now here he depicts Jerusalem, and this is totally haze. It gives me a feeling of something mystic. And here, I think in my mind, and it's not necessarily true, we have in Jewish thought the idea that there are two Jerusalems. Earthly Jerusalem, that's the one in which we function and live, which is called Yerushalayim Shel Mata. And then there is heavenly Jerusalem, Yerushalayim Shel Mala. And that is what Jerusalem represents: peace, harmony, spirituality, and so on. So to me, this Jerusalem that he paints, although I kind of can see the hills, but to me it looks like heavenly Jerusalem. And again, the same cypress and the trees in front of it. I think this is just beautiful. Here are again trees, but these are of the olive. He painted a lot of olives. And here you see in the naive painting, while part of it is very mystical, the figures are childlike. You see a person shaking the tree to get the olives out. You see on the left side a donkey with bags and women carrying on their head the olives that they picked. So again, similar idea. This one he calls heavenly Jerusalem. And in this one, if we were a smaller group, I would love to hear, unless somebody wants to volunteer. What do you think of? You see, anybody wants to venture, say something, please feel free. Nobody wants to. Okay. So to me, it is his depiction of creation. I don't want to say that that is God, because that would not sit with me or anyone else, but maybe the angels who accompanied God, because you know, if you read Genesis, God is always talking to the angels, and he uses the plural language. He says, let us make a man in our image. He says, let us. He doesn't say, let me. So Rashi explains that he talks to the angels. Modern scholars say he talks like a king, like the King of England would say, we the King of England. I like the angels. So perhaps this is an angel, but you definitely have the moon and the sun, and God puts them, you know, in heaven, and you see the rays, and he calls it heavenly Jerusalem. I see creation. I see wings of angels. So that is what I see in it. Moving on.
And someone again asked if you could mention dates.
These are all in the same series. The same series, 1926 to 30 some. If I do this, I could not, this presentation, I could not show my notes and have exactly the year, but I thought you would prefer to see the painting this way. So you remember those who were in the first presentation, and I started with that now, that the idea of Zionism was to rebuild the Jewish nation.
Someone
So,
said it reminded them of the coronavirus.
oh my God, yes. Oh, wow. Yes, it does. Well, I don't know. Does it mean anything? I don't know. Hope not. But yes, it definitely is reminiscent of that. Now that we all became pseudoscientists and we know how a coronavirus looks. Anyway, the idea was to take a nation that looked something like this. This is post-Holocaust, and remake them, give them a home, give them freedom, give them independence in their own land. From this to a look like this. The young Israeli, this was 50 shekels in 1960. So you see the kibbutznik with this temple hat on, that special hat, kova temple. And you see agricultural settlements. There was great emphasis on agriculture in mountains to bring them to this image. From this image on the right, that's a painting of a painter called Yossel Bergner, who depicted a lot of images during the Holocaust. And you see the fear, the despair in the face of this young girl, and above this weird, threatening creatures. To change a young child from that, like those what people went through in the Holocaust, to the image on the left, that was for a long time the image of Israel in cartoons. It was painted by Dosh. This character even had the name Srulik, which is the name of a nickname for Israel. And you see, he has a big smile on his face. He's looking to the future. He has this lock of hair. He has military boots, but he's happy looking to the future. So this ends my presentation today. Why can't I stop it?
Stop sharing your screen.
I'm trying, but my froze. How maybe I'll do end presentation somehow.
Let me see if I can do it. Hang on.
You can, my cursor froze. Oh, maybe I'll play with it and it will come. Oh, no. I'm moving it down, but I cannot. Oh, this is disappointing. I did not expect. Oh, now everything disappeared. Tell me if I still don't have the.
There we go.
Ta-da!
It just took me a minute to find it.
So please take me off the spotlight so we can see.
Okay. Okay, now everybody can change their view. So you can change the view to however you want to see it so everyone can see everyone. If you change it to gallery view, and you could turn your microphones back off, take yourself off mute if you want to talk or ask questions or make comments. Judith, that was really wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. I would love to hear from some people, what comments on the paintings. Oh, thank you.
It's unmuted.
Go ahead, Esther. Do you have a question? You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I do. How long did he paint?
Oh,
when did he pass away? Did he continue?
I think I mentioned when he passed away on the beginning.
Okay.
I think I don't remember per se. I can go back to my presentation, and my cursor is not working. It's not moving.
You mentioned that he was
70s.
ambassador. Did he continue painting while he was
all
ambassador?
All the time. He painted, I think sometime 19. I wish I could go back to that. No, I can't. My cursor is not working. I think he died maybe in
I
1980.
remember,
Some.
I have some of his stuff.
Yeah, who has some of his stuff?
She just said, who has some of this?
Because I heard somebody say we have some of his stuff.
You said
I think I do. Me.
Who
Oh,
is that
good.
speaking?
Nate. Nate,
Oh, Nate?
Nate might
Okay.
have.
I think,
Nate,
I wish I could see everyone and my cursor is not moving. I
Nate
think-
Arnold is mentioned. Do you have some of his art, Nate?
I may have. It looks familiar. I have to double check it. I have to look at my painting. My paintings are in the other room.
There are lots of lithographs of his. He was very prolific. There are not paper cuts. He made linoleum cuts and just very, very prolific. He painted to his last day. But maybe I'll tell you when. Hold on. Go to, now we have Google, don't we? And I am not good with dates. So I want to find when he passed away. If anybody can find it sooner, go ahead.
I got it in Encyclopedia Judith.
Rouven Ruben and all, and 1974.
That's what I said, 1974.
Judith,
Interestingly, I'm glad you asked it, whoever asked it, because remember his painting of the dancers in Miron, that mystical rabbis, was put on a stamp in 1976. So it was shortly after his passing. I think that's why they decided to put it on a stamp. Also, that I neglected to mention, that painting of the rabbis in Miron is part of a series that he called Mevakshei Elohim, Seekers of God, which tells you of his spiritual side.
are you familiar with Avraham Ofek?
Not very much, not very
Okay.
much.
Okay.
But I do know, but not him.
Yeah, I think he has a mural at the Tel Aviv University.
Very possible. By the way, after his wife bequested their home to the state of Israel, and then it became the Ruben Museum in Tel Aviv. So once we can travel again and you are in Israel, you may want to see it, as is Nahum Gutman's home. There is a big Nahum Gutman Museum in Tel Aviv.
I have a Rouven Ruben.
I think that's it.
Two
Go ahead,
things.
Esther.
Can I say two things? You just mentioned Nachman Gutman's home. At the NAMAD convention in 2007, a group of us, they organized it for us, a tour of his home. Second, that Seder painting,
No.
the figure on the very left, I'm sorry, but it reminded me of Christ, of
Oh my God, Esther, I
the
thought
look
that
in the
too.
white. Did
Yes.
anybody else think the
Well,
same?
that was the
I
last
did.
Seder.
I did.
That was the Seder that he was at,
I
in a
thought
way.
that also.
But he called it the first Seder.
The first Seder, like it was his first Seder in Palestine or something,
Yes.
but it was Christ. I mean,
That figure, but he was influenced by Byzantine paintings. So I think perhaps he meant to depict one of the other people living in Israel, in Palestine at that time. But to me, I also thought of Christ, the way he was dressed, and yeah, I did.
I just
I
want to
did
mention
too.
one thing.
It
I
jumped
just-
out at me.
Go ahead,
also.
Harriet.
No, it just jumped out at me. I felt that way too.
I did too.
And it just looked strange. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of didn't belong. But, you know, I think we as a person are the sum of all our experiences and what we are exposed to. And this was his part of growing up. And so this was some of the imagery that he carried with him.
I just wanted to mention, on behalf of Na'amat, I again want to thank all of you for joining us. And I really want to thank Judith for doing such a wonderful presentation. Kudos to you. You really did a great job.
Thank you. This is
If-
labor of love. I love it.
If anyone would like to donate to honor Judith, please feel free. You can go to our website, which is Naamat CLE for Cleveland.org. And we would love to see some donations in honor of Judith and all of the hard work that she does. Again, she isn't getting paid for any of this. It really is, you know, her love of this, and it's our love and appreciation for this that makes these so wonderful. We've already had a number of people ask, when's the next one going to be? So.
Thank you. We'll have to figure something out.
And if anyone has some suggestions or artists or styles of art that you would like to see, just let me know and we'll talk with Judith about whether or not she could do that.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, have a good day, everyone. Does anybody else
Thank
have
you.
anything they want to say?
Did Nate have an art? Does Nate have a piece of art from him?
Nate, did
I'm
you have a
not
chance
sure.
to look?
Show us.
Wow.
Oh, yes.
Will I? No, that's
Yes.
the-
It's very similar to his work, and it's the
Doesn't say
Harp
Nate.
of David. Harp of David. It's a paper cut
no, it's a litho.
lithograph.
Yeah.
Hi,
I
Edith.
have
Go ahead.
I had one of those big coffee table books of Rouven Ruben,
Yeah, he's I
art,
love him. I
which
think
is
he's very,
unfortunately, too big and heavy to bring to Israel. So somebody in Cleveland must be enjoying it.
Oh,
Hello, Edith.
happy birthday, Edith.
Can
Oh,
we
happy
sing happy
birthday.
birthday to Edith?
Happy